So we're going to move on a little bit or maybe just around to talk, dare I say it, what you've transformed. But of course, you've talked a lot about some of your transformation journeys. I'm sure even with your career, there's probably one or two that stand out, though.
Yeah, I think when I was working with banks as a consultant at McKinsey, what always stood out for me was logically and obviously, there are levers that they could be pulling to make themselves substantially more competitive without shifting the market dynamic, without shifting their competitive position. They would just have more margin. And I never understood why they wouldn't do it. And it's one of the things that I still struggle to understand in companies is why leadership of companies is lazy on cost, and particularly lazy on deploying things that make time, cost, quality better, as sort of organizational effectiveness levers. These would seem somewhat obvious to do because they make you the best version of yourself. They don't change your market positioning, your market context, but put you in charge of the dialogue because you're the lowest cost producer. And so a large part that forms how I think about transformational dynamics is I couldn't understand that. So I went, well, I'm pretty sure that I can build a bank that operates at 1/10 of the costs of your traditional bank. And they went, no, it can't be done. And that sort of infuriated me because I felt it was obvious. I was probably arrogant at the time, but we then did build a business that operated at a fraction of the costs that normal retail banks operate at. And then you suddenly go, oh, we can win this game because they have to chase us. And so 2020 was foundational in so much that it proved that you can translate the logic, the consulting speak, the presentational pages into an operating footprint. I had a wonderful partner who was incredibly practical and creative in how we did things, and a great bunch of technologists. And I learned so much from them as sort of the junior partner in the venture, which is we can do what we set our minds to do if we build it in a very logical, fact-based way. And then suddenly you have this super, super lean way of doing something, which I think why it stands out for me, it's the first time you went from theory to practice. And just in 18 months, write it down, two people, in a garage with a whiteboard, literally, right, or in the back of the car. You go out and build it. And then you say, if I choose to do it, my intellect is enough, my drive is enough, if I have the right partners. And so then the critical part becomes, who do I do with? And that shapes how you think from then onwards. And then we weren't as successful as we could have been because we underestimated market context. We underestimated the value of partnerships. We probably raised too little money.
Okay.
We probably moved too quickly. We could have slowed down a little bit. We weren't conscious of threats, but still it was a definitive experience. And then I think the work with Stan Chart was lots of small innovations, which teaches you that innovation and transformation isn't always big bang. There's this notion of intensity. Can I do many, many small things fast, or I can do a few big things? And if you it helps me now with my Japanese owners, Kaizen is do lots of small things and do them often. Plan them well, do them often, keep going. This idea of continuous improvement. You actually get a lot further. And so the one that stood out there for me was when I arrived at Stan Chart, it didn't even have digital banking. And a coalition of the willing formed at the center of the bank with some amazing personalities, some people who are still good friends, and we want to be number one digital bank. And then what does that mean? How do we work on it? And over the period of 5 years, we went from nowhere to being the leading digital bank in 19 countries in our footprint. And why 19 countries is so important is because you just pushed the expertise to the periphery of the enterprise. So you weren't just best in Hong Kong, which is Stan Chart's biggest market, and then best in Singapore and best in India, you were best in Nigeria, best in Kenya. So you proved that the methodology and the techniques and the digital awareness, the way that the company runs, it works everywhere. And you get this real confidence that we can win in every market. And then we did some gimmicks and, took the app up to the top of Everest, which is, the digital team's, gimmick. But, it created awareness, which helped us. But building foundational capability became really important. And the one I've done most recently, the one that you were involved in, was take a company that's entirely analog end to end. And culturally is in love with that because we're special. writing books about ourselves, eulogizing our qualities in the marketplace. But when we scratch under the skin, it's literally paper and files and thousands of people moving those papers and files. And then the outcome is very poor because you underuse analytics, you underuse digital capability. There's no efficiency in the business. It's all based on a few smart people, which is also not sustainable.
And I don't think customers were raving.
Customers were not raving. And you sort of become a grudge purchase, if you will. And if you're there, you're in trouble because anybody that's more efficient than you, everybody uses data better than you, everybody that's more digital than you are, and anybody that has a greater relation with the customer than you have, they'll always win. You're just picking up the scraps in the marketplace, and particularly in a lending business, to have that type of negative select in your portfolio is very, very bad. You're always going to struggle. So that was the most interesting one because we changed fundamentally how the culture worked. And that I think was the most interesting for me because most of what I'd done before was really technical in nature. Great collaborators, a willingness to go, everybody on the journey with you pretty easily. And then, so what do we do technically? And this was one where you went, well, this company is not in trouble because the people aren't clever. Is they're choosing to eulogize a business model which is not fit for purpose, and then you have to move them. And in that case, we lost almost 2/3 of the executive and more than 50% of the staff to rebuild that culture in the right way, which was a different learning, but it really stands out because I probably learned more, and I suspect everybody that worked with us, including yourself, learned an incredible amount about changing how people think, changing how people perceive the world. And some of these people had known no other business model. This is the only place they'd worked. So that becomes more interesting because as I do bigger and bigger changes, delivering the culture change is the way you get it to stick and make it sustainable. And so I had incidents in earlier years where we did transformational projects for clients and then they would regress quite quickly. And it became, you had not established, and particularly the cultural foundations to keep moving, to keep going. And so then ultimately the transformation is a success, but just for a millisecond, and then it starts to backslide almost immediately.
So is that the reason why, and we'll come on to more the Deem story, because I think there's rich pickings there, but it's widely cited that 70% of transformations are unsuccessful.
Unsuccessful in the long term, I think, which is really important. That often you can have great success in the project and you can hit all your measures. I think what I see in a lot of those that are in that 70% that people see as failing is you haven't addressed the foundational elements that lock it in place after you've moved it. So it naturally just slides back to where it was because, and again, it's this sort of technical challenge versus the adaptive challenge. The technical challenge has become the major part of what everybody's doing. And actually, what I learned in the Deem story is if you change the culture, and there's many ways you can change it, but if you can lock it in, then it will continue for a very long time after you're gone, because it's the default of how the company works. And Deem continues to be very successful in the Middle East, which is very pleasing.
But I think what you did there, to your point, is you changed the muscle memory.
Yeah.
So instead of the elasticity back to the old world, it stayed where you left it, and I think has continued to.
Yeah, so I think we achieved something quite dramatic, that we severed the link to the past.
Yeah,
in a very aggressive way, including rebranding the company, changing the leadership, but we also changed fundamentally the technical underpinnings of the business, policies, procedures, technology, and that made a really big difference. And there's a lot of it was symbolism to create the mindset change, but a lot of it was hard wiring. You actually can't do anything else. And part of why I love digitizing businesses is because you can hardwire the new way into the business, so it's very, very hard to regress. If you leave it in an analog, humanistic way, people will go back to what people are most comfortable with, and you don't anchor them against something. So performance management systems are an example of how do you lock people into the new way of thinking by establishing a performance management system, which is different from the one they had before, and amplifies the things that you want and eliminates the things that you don't want.
That's great. And because we tend to think of transformation in quite a kind of logical way, but there's a big emotional side to transformation.
Yeah, I think it's almost all emotional.
There you go.
And that's sort of the learning. As I did more and more transformations, and you become frustrated, you learn two things. One is to stop at the very beginning and make an assessment, right? So don't be in a hurry. So one, do we need to change? Why do we need to change? Relative to our industry, relative to our competitors, relative to general market movements. Today we'd assess AI as an important market movement. You go back to 20 years and the emergence of the internet as the dominant information sharing capability in the world. It's almost inevitable you must move, but it's worth just taking the pause and going, if I need to change, why? What do we need to achieve? Assuming then you've got the right partners and collaborators, just take that pause to understand why we're doing it. Because if you can understand the why, it also becomes easier to convey that as a message to the people that you have to carry with you. So establish very clearly, yes, we need to do, this is why we need to do it. And then importantly, where do we want to go? Not in tight destination terms, but as a general target area, we need to be somewhere different. Then you can start. And then you have to deal with all of the emotion that comes with it. So my 2 lessons over a long period of time is just set up the preconditions really well. And then the second part, spend a lot of time on giving, not just helping people or giving them a good environment, but giving them actual work to do so that they are transforming through action. Okay. Give them things to do. Go on a culture journey where the company redefines its own culture in line with where you want to go. Lean into that curiously and authentically, but let them shape it. And then suddenly everybody's busy, working productively, and there's less time for anxiety and also less need for anxiety because they're part of producing this new version of everything. And you can give them a lot of work to do. The coders will code, but a lot of people worry about the fact that I'll be left out of this, I won't have a role in this. But you put them to work in understanding how do we want to run this company? Who do we want to be? How do we want to talk to customers? And you give them a very active role in that. So it's less transformation through telling and a much more organic version of how we're going to do this. And then I think it makes the role of the CEO or the leader much more interesting because you're, in that sense, we often talk about plant a flag on the hill or, and you guess, no, that's not what's happening. You're in a conversation with a very large group of people. And if you are open to it, they will shape a better version of the outcome than you would have by yourself or you with your favorite consulting firm. But you get to shape it. You get to put limits on it. If it's drifting too far, of course, you get to put it back. But that collective energy is what long-term makes the change stick. So your technical answer may only be 80% of what you'd hope for, but it's going to be solid as opposed to, I might have 100 and I'll be back at 60 before I'm done. Then that 80 becomes the new baseline for the next generation of change.